"I'll give you 3 million if you solve this equation." The words echoed through the room like a bomb about to explode. Margaret Foster felt the blood rush to her face as she tightly gripped the cleaning cloth in her hands. The businessman Richard Thompson stood there, in front of the blackboard filled with equations that had been tormenting the scientists for months, pointing at her with that mocking smile she had learned to hate during the 2 years working as a cleaner in that Chicago laboratory. The offer came out of his mouth as if it were the most natural thing in the world. $3 million for a woman who earned minimum wage cleaning the boards containing the company's most important discoveries. The researchers laughed nervously. Some lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Others just watched the scene with morbid curiosity. But Margaret didn't laugh. She stopped cleaning and stared intently at the complex equations scribbled on the board, numbers and symbols that danced before her eyes like old acquaintances. Dr. Stephen Harrison, the most senior researcher on the team, felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way the cleaner was looking at those equations that deeply bothered him. It wasn't confused look of someone who understood nothing, but rather the focused concentration of someone processing complex information. He vaguely remembered a professor he had in university, decades ago, who had that same penetrating gaze when faced with a challenging mathematical problem. Margaret had accepted the cleaning job 2 years earlier, when life had backed her into a corner in ways she never imagined possible. Her mother, Mrs. Dorothy, was hospitalized in a very expensive private hospital, fighting a rare disease that was consuming all the family's savings like a hungry black hole. The health insurance had denied coverage, claiming the treatment was experimental, and Margaret found herself forced to accept any job that came her way. The silence in the room became awkward. Richard Thompson expected an answer, preferably a timid refusal he could use to humiliate her further in front of his team. He was going through an especially difficult period, with the company on the verge of bankruptcy and investors pressuring for results. The equation on the board represented the key to a revolutionary discovery that could save not only the company, but also thousands of lives around the world. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell, one of the few women on the research team, felt a mixture of indignation and curiosity. She had noticed over the months that Margaret always cleaned the boards with special care, as if she were studying what was written there instead of simply erasing it. Several times she caught the cleaner pausing for long minutes in front of the most complex equations, with an expression that didn't match someone who supposedly understood nothing of it. Emily Thompson, Richard's daughter and recently graduated in business administration, watched the scene from a corner of the room with growing discomfort. She knew her father's authoritarian temper and had witnessed other humiliating situations like this one. But this time, there was something different in the air, a tension she couldn't completely identify. The cleaner didn't seem intimidated like other people usually were in the face of her father's verbal attacks. Margaret finally turned to face Richard Thompson directly. Her blue eyes shone with a determination that took everyone by surprise. She wasn't a tall woman, but at that moment, she seemed to occupy the entire room with her presence. Her hands, calloused from hard work, held the cleaning cloth as if it were a shield, and her voice came out firm and clear when she finally responded. "I accept," said Margaret, surprising not only Richard, but the entire team present. "But I want to make it clear that I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it to prove that competence knows no social class." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the businessman blinked several times, clearly not expecting that response. He had made the proposal as a form of cruel entertainment, never imagining that the cleaning lady would actually accept the challenge. The situation had completely escaped his control, and now he found himself forced to honor a bet made out of pure arrogance. Margaret approached the board with confident steps, ignoring the curious and skeptical looks from the scientists around her. She picked up a piece of chalk from the tray and began examining each part of the equation with the meticulousness of a surgeon analyzing a patient before a delicate operation. Her mind traveled back to the days when she was a university professor, spending hours in front of similar boards, explaining complex concepts to students eager for knowledge. Dr. Stephen Harrison discreetly approached, pretending to organize some papers on his desk, but actually observing every move the cleaning lady made, the way she held the chalk, how her eyes scanned the equations, even the posture she adopted in front of the board. All of it brought back distant memories from his time as a student. He began to suspect there was much more to this simple woman than met the eye. The first part of the equation Margaret began working on involved extremely complex partial derivative calculations. To everyone's surprise, she didn't hesitate for even a second before starting to write. Her movements were fluid and confident, as if she were solving an elementary problem. The younger researchers exchanged confused glances, unable to understand how a cleaning lady could be so familiar with advanced mathematics. Linda Anderson, the cleaning supervisor, arrived in the room at that moment to check on the progress of the work, and came across a completely surreal scene. Margaret, her most dedicated and discreet employee, was standing in front of the blackboard, solving equations that made the company's most experienced scientists' hair stand on end. Linda felt her legs weaken and had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Richard Thompson began to sweat cold when he realized Margaret actually knew what she was doing. He had offered $3 million, thinking it would be a cruel joke, but now he faced the real possibility of having to pay that absurd amount. The company was already in serious financial trouble, and $3 million would represent the final blow that would lead it straight to total bankruptcy. The first derivative equation Margaret solved was correct. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell discreetly checked it on her tablet and confirmed that all the steps were mathematically perfect. She felt a mixture of admiration and bewilderment taking over her chest. How was it possible that a cleaning lady had such advanced knowledge in applied mathematics? Margaret continued working, seemingly unaware of the silent turmoil her performance was causing around her. Every number she wrote on the board seemed to spring naturally from her mind, as if she were simply transcribing something she already knew by heart. Her hands moved with surgical precision, and her concentration was so intense that she seemed to have entered a kind of mathematical trance. Emily Thompson watched the gradual transformation in her father's expression with growing interest. Richard went from initial arrogance to disbelief, then to nervousness, and was now clearly entering panic. She had never seen the powerful man who ran a multi-million-dollar company show such vulnerability, and it made her question many of the things she believed about social hierarchies. Dr. Stephen finally mustered the courage to move closer to the board. When he saw the method Margaret was using to solve the second part of the equation, his heart raced. It was exactly the approach his former advanced calculus teacher, Dr. Margaret Foster, used to employ in her most challenging classes. He looked more closely at the cleaner's face and felt an impact as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Professor Margaret," he whispered, too low for others to hear. Margaret paused for a fraction of a second, the chalk trembling slightly in her hand, before continuing to write. She had recognized the voice, even after all these years. Stephen had been one of her brightest students, and seeing him there, recognizing her in that humiliating situation, sent a wave of conflicting emotions sweeping through her heart. The second part of the equation was being solved with a mathematical elegance that left even the most experienced researchers speechless. Margaret not only knew how to solve the problem, but was doing it in a more efficient way than any method they had tried before. Her approach revealed years of academic experience and a deep understanding of the fundamental principles behind those complex formulas. Richard Thompson tried to hide his growing desperation by forcing a nervous laugh. "Well, that's interesting," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone specific. "But solving some parts doesn't mean solving the whole problem." His words sounded hollow even to himself, especially when everyone in the room could see that Margaret was systematically advancing through each component of the equation with impressive competence. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell decided to take a more active stance in the situation. She discreetly approached Margaret and whispered, "If you need anything, paper, a calculator, any tools, just ask." Margaret nodded with a small, grateful smile, but continued working only with the chalk, as if she needed nothing more than her own mind to solve the problem that had frustrated an entire team of specialized scientists. Linda Anderson finally managed to process what she was seeing and cautiously approached Margaret. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Margaret, do you really know how to do this?" The question echoed what everyone in the room was thinking, but no one had the courage to verbalize directly. Margaret stopped writing for a moment and turned to face Linda. Tears were forming in her eyes, but her voice remained steady when she replied, "I was a university professor for 15 years, Linda. Applied mathematics was my specialty." The revelation fell upon the room like a bomb, finally explaining the mystery of how a cleaner could have such advanced knowledge. Margaret's story began to gradually unfold for the fascinated audience. She had lost her job at the university during a budget restructuring that eliminated several departments considered non-essential by the new administration. At the same time, her mother was diagnosed with a rare disease that required very expensive treatments not covered by the health insurance plan. Margaret found herself forced to accept any available work to be able to pay the medical bills. Dr. Stephen moved closer, his suspicions now confirmed. "Professor, I was your student 20 years ago," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You taught me everything I know about differential calculus. How did you end up here?" The question revealed the pain he felt, seeing his former mentor reduced to cleaning boards, where she had once shone as an educator. Richard Thompson watched the conversation with growing discomfort. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of the mistake he had made, not just in humiliating Margaret, but in wasting the talent of someone with such impressive qualifications. The irony of the situation, having a PhD mathematician cleaning boards while his team struggled to solve problems she could have easily resolved, didn't escape him. Margaret discreetly wiped away a tear and turned her attention back to the board. "The past is past, Dr. Stephen," she said softly. "What matters now is proving that competence doesn't expire, regardless of where you work or what uniform you wear." Her words resonated deeply in the room, transforming what began as cruel humiliation into a powerful lesson about human worth and dignity. The third section of the equation required advanced knowledge in linear algebra and number theory. Margaret tackled this part with the same unshakable confidence she had demonstrated earlier, her calculations flowing across the board like mathematical poetry. The younger researchers completely stopped pretending they were working on other things and openly gathered around her, watching each step with growing admiration. Emily Thompson felt a wave of shame about her father's behavior. She had been raised believing financial success was synonymous with intellectual superiority, but was witnessing a clear demonstration that true talents can be found in the most unexpected places. The humility and dignity Margaret displayed contrasted dramatically with the arrogance and insecurity her father exhibited. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell decided to take more decisive action. She discreetly called Dr. David Reynolds, the company's scientific director, who was in a meeting in another building. "You need to come here immediately," she whispered into the phone. "Something extraordinary is happening in the lab that you won't believe until you see it with your own eyes." News of what was happening began spreading through the building via text messages and whispered conversations. Employees from other departments began finding excuses to pass by the laboratory, curious to see the cleaning lady who was solving problems that had stumped PhDs for months. The atmosphere became charged with anticipation and admiration. Margaret was now working on the fourth section of the equation, which involved extremely advanced functional analysis concepts. To everyone's surprise, she not only demonstrated familiarity with these concepts, but was applying them in an innovative way none of the researchers had previously considered. Her approach was not only correct, but elegantly efficient. Linda Anderson remained leaning against the wall, still trying to process the revelation about Margaret's past. During 2 years working together, Margaret had never mentioned her academic background. She had always been the most dedicated and careful employee, but Linda had attributed this simply to exemplary work ethic. Now she understood there was much more behind that dedication. Richard Thompson was visibly sweating now. He did some quick mental calculations and realized that if Margaret actually solved the equation, the $3 million he promised would represent only a fraction of the value this discovery would bring the company. But the problem was that the company didn't have $3 million available at the moment, and he might be forced to sell personal assets to honor the bet. Dr. Stephen approached Margaret during a brief pause. "Professor, why did you never reach out to us?" he asked gently. Any university would be honored to have you back." Margaret smiled sadly before responding. "Pride, Dr. Stephen. Too much pride to ask for help, and too much fear of being rejected after being cast aside once." The fifth section of the equation was the most complex of all, involving multivariate integration in high-dimensional spaces. Margaret paused for a longer moment this time, clearly organizing her thoughts before proceeding. When she finally began writing, it was like watching a maestro conducting a symphony. Each movement was precise and intentional. Dr. David Reynolds arrived at the lab completely out of breath after running from the other building. When Dr. Jennifer Mitchell quickly explained the situation to him, he initially thought she was joking, but when he saw Margaret working at the board with the confidence of an experienced professor, he immediately understood he was witnessing something truly extraordinary. Emily Thompson quietly approached her father. "Dad, do you know who she really is?" Richard shook his head no, clearly still in shock. "Then maybe it's time you learn not to judge people by appearances," Emily said softly but firmly. Her words hit Richard like a gentle slap, forcing him to confront his own prejudices. The sixth section of the equation required knowledge in probability theory and Bayesian statistics. Margaret attacked this part with renewed energy, as if each solved section gave her more confidence to face the next. Her calculations were not only correct, but demonstrated a deep understanding of the practical implications of each result. Linda Anderson finally found her voice again. "Margaret, why did you never tell me about your background?" she asked, approaching cautiously. Margaret paused to look her directly in the eyes. "Because I was afraid you would treat me differently," she admitted. "This job gave me dignity when I needed it most. I didn't want pity to replace the respect I had earned." Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was discreetly documenting the entire process on her tablet, recognizing that she was witnessing not just an impressive mathematical demonstration, but a historic moment that needed to be preserved. The elegance with which Margaret solved each section surpassed anything she had seen at prestigious academic conferences. The seventh section involved concepts of differential geometry that few mathematicians fully mastered. Margaret approached this part with the same unshakable confidence, but Dr. Stephen noticed a slight hesitation in her movements. "Professor, this part has always been tricky, even for you," he commented gently. Margaret smiled and nodded. Some things never change, do they? Richard Thompson was now facing the reality that Margaret would most likely solve the entire equation. He began considering not only the financial implications, but also the professional and personal ramifications of the entire situation. How would he explain to the investors that a janitor managed to solve in hours a problem that his team of scientists couldn't solve in months? Dr. David Reynolds quietly approached Richard. "You know what this means, don't you?" he whispered. "If she really solves this, it's not just the $3 million you owe her. It's a complete revolution in how our company operates." Richard nodded grimly, beginning to understand that he had completely underestimated the consequences of his arrogant bet. Margaret was now working on the eighth and penultimate section of the equation. Her concentration was so intense that she seemed unaware of the small crowd that had formed around her. Every movement of her wrist was watched with reverent admiration by the scientists who, just an hour before, had seen her as nothing more than part of the lab furniture. Emily Thompson decided to take action. She discreetly sent a message to her network of contacts on social media, including several journalists she had studied with in college. "You won't believe what's happening in my father's lab," she wrote, along with a discreet photo of the scene. She knew this story needed to be told, no matter the consequences for her father's reputation. Linda Anderson watched Margaret with a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride for having worked alongside someone so talented, and sadness for not having noticed the waste of potential happening right before her eyes. She wondered how many other talented people were hidden in jobs that didn't reflect their true capabilities. The ninth and final section of the equation was a complex synthesis that required integrating all previous results into a coherent and unified solution. Margaret paused for several minutes before starting, clearly organizing all the previous work in her mind. When she finally began to write, it was with deliberate and confident movements. Dr. Stephen was now openly emotional, tears streaming down his face as he watched his former professor demonstrate the same brilliance that had inspired him decades before. "She was always the best," he murmured to Dr. Jennifer Mitchell. "The best teacher I ever had, and probably the best mathematician I've ever met in person." Richard Thompson finally understood that he was about to witness something that would change not only his company, but potentially his own life. He slowly approached Margaret, who was putting the finishing touches on the solution. "Ma'am, Margaret," he said, his voice trembling. I owe you an apology." Margaret finished writing the last number and stepped back to examine her work. The entire board was now covered with a mathematically elegant and complete solution to the problem that had plagued the team for months. She turned to face Richard, her expression serene but determined. "Mr. Thompson, I don't want your apologies. I want the $3 million you promised." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, but the full implications were still being processed. Dr. David Reynolds was the first to break the silence, approaching the board to examine the solution more closely. "This is perfect," he murmured, checking each calculation with growing admiration. "Not just correct, but elegantly simplified. She found an approach that saves at least 6 months of additional work." He turned to Margaret with reverent respect. "Ma'am, who are you really?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Margaret took a deep breath before answering. "My full name is Margaret Foster Williams, PhD in Applied Mathematics from Northwestern University, full professor for 15 years until I was laid off in budget cuts. For the past 2 years, I've worked as a cleaner in this lab to pay for my mother's medical treatment." Her voice remained steady, but everyone could detect the underlying emotion in her words. Dr. David Reynolds felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "We had a PhD cleaning our boards while we struggled to solve problems she could have solved on the first day." He looked around the room, his expression revealing shock and horror at the absurd situation that had unfolded right before their eyes. Richard Thompson was now facing the full reality of his situation. He had not only humiliated a highly qualified woman, but had wasted 2 years of invaluable intellectual potential. And now he needed to find $3 million that he didn't have to honor a bet he made out of pure arrogance and cruelty. Emily Thompson watched the transformation in her father's posture with grim satisfaction. She had grown up seeing Richard treat employees as disposable objects and had always felt uncomfortable with that attitude. Now he was being forced to confront the real human consequences of his prejudices and arrogance. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell approached Margaret with evident admiration. "Dr. Margaret, I studied some of your papers in graduate school. You're a legend in the field of mathematical optimization. How did this happen?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Life happened, Dr. Mitchell. Sometimes talents are wasted not for lack of ability, but because of cruel circumstances." Linda Anderson was struggling with her own emotions. For 2 years, she had supervised Margaret thinking she was helping someone less qualified keep a simple job. Now she discovered she had been supervising someone infinitely more educated and talented than herself. The reversal of hierarchy was disconcerting and humiliating. Dr. Stephen approached Margaret with tears in his eyes. "Professor, why didn't you come to me? I could have helped. I could have arranged something at the university." Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Stephen, you were my student. It wasn't your responsibility to save your teacher when she fell from grace." Richard Thompson finally found his voice again. "Dr. Margaret, I don't have $3 million in cash available immediately." Margaret stared at him with an expression mixing determination and compassion. "Then I suggest you find a way to get it, Mr. Thompson. A bet is a bet, and competence deserves to be rewarded." Dr. David Reynolds was now thinking beyond the immediate implications. "Doctor, Margaret, this solution you just provided is worth much more than $3 million to our company. It could revolutionize our entire research program." Margaret nodded. "I know, Dr. Reynolds. I've been watching your work for 2 years, cleaning the boards and seeing where you were going wrong." The revelation that Margaret had been observing and analyzing the team's work the entire time she worked as a cleaner added a new layer of complexity to the situation. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell realized the implications immediately. "You mean you could have solved this at any time during the past 2 years?" Margaret nodded slowly. "I identified the fundamental problems in your approach within the first few weeks. But who was going to listen to a cleaner?" Her words echoed through the room like a silent accusation against everyone who had ignored her potential for so long. Emily Thompson could no longer contain her indignation. "Father, do you realize what you've done? You wasted not only her talent, but delayed your own research out of pure prejudice." Richard was visibly shaken, his usual arrogance completely evaporated in the face of the magnitude of his error. Dr. Stephen was now connecting more dots of the situation. "Professor, you mentioned your mother's treatment. Is that why you needed the money?" Margaret nodded, her composure finally beginning to crack slightly. "She's been hospitalized for 3 years. The treatment costs $15,000 per month, and our insurance denies coverage." The human dimension of Margaret's situation hit everyone in the room like a punch to the stomach. Dr. David Reynolds felt a wave of guilt and corporate responsibility. A highly qualified employee had been reduced to manual labor, while her family faced a devastating medical crisis, and no one in management had bothered to investigate their employees' backgrounds. Richard Thompson was now facing not only the financial consequences of his bet, but also the recognition of his own moral failing. "Dr. Margaret," he said, his voice filled with genuine emotion, "I can't undo what I did, but I can try to correct at least part of the damage." Margaret observed Richard with cautious curiosity. She had learned to be skeptical of promises from powerful men, especially after having been dismissed so easily by the university years before. "What are you proposing, Mr. Thompson?" she asked, maintaining a neutral but alert tone. "First, I will honor my bet, even if it means selling personal assets," Richard said, his voice gaining strength as he made his decisions. "Second, I would like to offer you a position as Director of Mathematical Research, with a salary matching your actual qualifications." Dr. David Reynolds intervened immediately. "Richard, that's an excellent idea, but we need to be realistic about the company's financial capabilities at this moment." Margaret watched the exchange between the two men with growing interest, realizing there were complex corporate dynamics at play that she didn't fully understand. Emily Thompson decided to contribute to the conversation. "Dad, if Dr. Margaret's solution is as valuable as Dr. David suggests, perhaps the $3 million are just the beginning. Maybe she should become a partner in the company instead of just an employee." The suggestion took everyone by surprise, including Margaret. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was impressed with the maturity of Emily's suggestion. "Emily is right. If Dr. Margaret can solve in hours problems that took us months to tackle, she should have a share in the profits her competence will generate." Margaret remained silent, processing the implications of all the offers being made. Linda Anderson finally found the courage to speak. "Margaret, I'm sorry I didn't realize who you really were. If I had known—" Margaret gently interrupted her. "Linda, you treated me with dignity and respect when others didn't. That's worth more than any academic recognition." Dr. Stephen was watching the entire negotiation with growing admiration for his former professor. She was navigating the situation with the same strategic intelligence she had always demonstrated in the classroom, carefully considering each offer before responding. Margaret finally broke her silence. "Gentlemen, I appreciate all the offers, but I need to be clear about one thing. I don't just want a better job. I want real change in how this company treats all its employees." Her words revealed that she was thinking far beyond her own situation. Richard Thompson realized that Margaret was negotiating from a position of strength, not just because of the mathematical solution, but because of the moral lesson she had taught everyone. "What do you have in mind, Dr. Margaret?" he asked, genuinely interested in hearing her proposals. "I want a program created to identify and develop hidden talents among all the company's employees, regardless of their current position," Margaret said with conviction. "How many other qualified people are being wasted in positions that don't reflect their actual capabilities?" Dr. David Reynolds immediately saw the value of the proposal. "That's brilliant, not just from a human perspective, but also from operational efficiency. We could be sitting on a goldmine of unrecognized talent. Emily Thompson nodded enthusiastically, admiring Margaret's vision even more. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was excited about the possibilities. We could create a continuous evaluation system where employees could demonstrate skills that go beyond their current job descriptions. This would revolutionize our corporate culture. Margaret smiled, seeing her ideas being met with genuine enthusiasm. Linda Anderson felt inspired by the conversation. I could help with that. As a supervisor, I see many employees daily. I've always noticed that some of them had knowledge that seemed to go beyond their current jobs. Margaret nodded approvingly, pleased to see that her ideas were resonating at different levels of the organization. Richard Thompson was now seeing opportunities where he once saw only problems. Dr. Margaret, if we implement this program and you lead our mathematical research division, I believe we can transform this company into an innovation leader in the sector. Margaret observed him carefully, assessing whether his change in attitude was genuine or just opportunism. Mr. Thompson, I need to see real commitment, not just words, Margaret said firmly. I want this program to start immediately, with a dedicated budget and real authority to make changes. And I want Linda to be promoted to coordinate the program alongside me. The proposal to include Linda surprised everyone, especially Linda herself. Dr. Stephen was impressed with the leadership ability Margaret was demonstrating. Professor, you've always been exceptional at identifying potential in other people. I remember how you encouraged students that other professors had dismissed. Margaret smiled nostalgically. Wasted talent is one of the greatest tragedies there is, Stephen. Emily Thompson was mentally documenting the entire transformation she was witnessing. In a matter of hours, a cruel bet had turned into an opportunity for fundamental corporate reform. She felt proud to have contributed to this evolution and ashamed of her father's initial behavior. Dr. David Reynolds was doing mental calculations about the financial implications of all the proposed changes. Dr. Margaret, if your estimates about the value of your mathematical solution are correct, the revenues generated in the coming years could easily fund all these reforms and more. Margaret nodded, clearly having done the same calculations. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Robert Patterson, the company's chief accountant, who had been urgently called to assess the financial implications of the situation. When Dr. David quickly explained what had happened, Robert turned visibly pale. $3 million. Richard, you know our cash flow situation doesn't allow for that right now. Margaret watched the exchange between the men with renewed interest. Mr. Thompson, if your company is truly in financial difficulties, perhaps we can negotiate a different arrangement. Richard looked at her with cautious hope. What kind of arrangement do you have in mind? Instead of $3 million in cash, I would accept equivalent equity in the company, plus authority to implement the reforms we discussed, plus full coverage of my mother's medical costs, Margaret proposed calmly. The proposal showed not only mathematical intelligence, but also sophisticated business acumen. Dr. Robert Patterson immediately saw the advantages of Margaret's proposal. That would be much more feasible for our current situation and would create aligned incentives for the company's long-term success. Richard nodded slowly, realizing that Margaret had found a solution that benefited everyone involved. Emily Thompson was amazed by Margaret's negotiation skills. Dr. Margaret, you turned a humiliating situation into an opportunity for genuine partnership. That's impressive. Margaret smiled modestly. Emily, sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as seemingly impossible challenges. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was reflecting on the academic implications of the situation. Dr. Margaret, your story should be shared widely. How many other talented people are in similar situations because of economic circumstances? Margaret considered the suggestion carefully. Perhaps this could help others, but only if it's done respectfully. Linda Anderson was still processing her unexpected promotion. Margaret, I don't know if I'm qualified to coordinate a program like this. Margaret placed an encouraging hand on her shoulder. Linda, you have something that can't be taught. You see people as human beings worthy of respect. That's the most important qualification. Dr. Stephen was moved, seeing his former professor not only regain her professional status, but find a way to make a difference in others' lives. Professor, You always said education was about transforming lives. Now you're doing it on a corporate scale. Margaret nodded, feeling she had finally found a way to use her talents for greater purposes. Richard Thompson was now completely transformed by the experience. Dr. Margaret, I want you to know this lesson fundamentally changed how I view leadership and human value. I commit not only to these changes, but to ensuring they're lasting. Margaret watched him cautiously, but saw genuine sincerity in his eyes. Dr. David Reynolds was excited about the research possibilities opening up. Dr. Margaret, with your leadership in the mathematics division, I believe we can develop solutions that go far beyond the original problem. Your interdisciplinary approach could revolutionize multiple areas of our research. Margaret smiled, feeling the intellectual excitement she hadn't experienced in years. The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Susan Bradley, the Human Resources Director, who had been informed about the extraordinary situation unfolding. When she fully understood what had happened, she was visibly disturbed. How is it possible that an employee with a PhD was classified as a cleaner for 2 years without anyone checking her background? Margaret intervened before the situation became more embarrassing. Dr. Susan, when I applied, I deliberately omitted my academic background. I needed work immediately, and new questions about my qualifications could delay the process. Her explanation eased some tension, but highlighted deeper systemic problems. Emily Thompson saw an opportunity to contribute constructively. Dr. Susan, perhaps this indicates we need better processes to discover and utilize hidden talents among our current employees. Dr. Susan nodded thoughtfully. Emily is right. This should be an integral part of the program we're discussing. Dr. Robert Patterson was now making more detailed calculations about Margaret's equity proposal. Dr. Margaret, based on the current company valuation and the potential value of your contribution, I'd estimate that a 15% stake would be equivalent to the $3 million promised. Margaret considered the offer carefully before responding. I would accept a 10% equity stake, plus executive authority to implement the discussed reforms, plus full medical coverage for my mother, plus a dedicated annual budget of $2 million for the talent development program, Margaret countered. Her negotiation showed not just intelligence, but also clear values about priorities. Richard Thompson considered the counter-proposal for a few moments before responding. Dr. Margaret, your conditions are more than fair. They demonstrate that you're committed not only to your own success, but to the positive transformation of the entire organization. He extended his hand to her. You have a deal. The handshake between Margaret and Richard symbolized much more than a business agreement. It represented a fundamental transformation in the company's power dynamics and values. Dr. Stephen observed the scene with tears in his eyes, seeing his former professor regain not only her professional position, but find a platform to positively impact many other lives. Linda Anderson was visibly emotional about her new responsibility. Margaret, I promise I won't disappoint you or the employees we're going to help. Margaret hugged her former supervisor, now colleague. Linda, I know you'll do exceptional work. You have something many executives don't. You genuinely care about people. Dr. David Reynolds was eager to start working with Margaret on reorganizing the research division. Dr. Margaret, when would you like to officially begin your new position? Margaret smiled. I'd like to start tomorrow, but first I need to finish my cleaning shift today. It's important for me to complete this phase of my life with dignity. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was impressed with the integrity Margaret demonstrated, even in her moment of triumph. Dr. Margaret, your attitude is an example to us all. You're showing that real success includes humility and respect for all kinds of honest work. Margaret nodded gratefully, pleased to see her values were being understood. Emily Thompson was reflecting on the lessons she'd learned during that extraordinary afternoon. Dad, I hope this experience permanently changes how our family treats people around us. Richard hugged his daughter, genuinely grateful for her wisdom. Emily, you're right. This was a lesson I needed to learn, and you helped me become a better person. Dr. Stephen approached Margaret as she collected her cleaning materials for the last time. Professor, I wanted you to know you've always been an inspiration to me. Seeing you overcome this adversity and turn it into an opportunity to help others confirms why you were such a special educator." Margaret smiled nostalgically. "Stephen, teaching was always about much more than mathematics. It was about showing people their own potential." Dr. Susan Bradley was now drafting plans to implement systemic changes based on the lessons learned. "Dr. Margaret, I'd like you to review our human resources processes to ensure we never waste talent the way we wasted yours." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "Dr. Susan, it would be an honor to contribute to these improvements." Dr. Robert Patterson was finalizing the legal aspects of the agreement. "Dr. Margaret, I'll prepare all necessary documents to formalize your new position and equity stake. I'll also include specific clauses about the talent development program." Margaret appreciated the attention to detail. "Dr. Robert, I appreciate your diligence in protecting everyone's interests." Linda Anderson was watching Margaret put away her cleaning materials with a mixture of sadness and pride. "Margaret, it's going to be strange not working alongside you in the cleaning." Margaret laughed softly. "Linda, we're going to be working together much more closely now, and I promise I'll never forget where we started." Dr. David Reynolds was making plans to announce the changes to the rest of the company. "Dr. Margaret, how would you like us to present your new position to the team?" Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I'd like us to focus on the message that talent can be found anywhere, and that our company is committed to recognizing and nurturing that talent." Emily Thompson was discreetly documenting the final moments of the transformation. She knew this story needed to be preserved and shared, not just as an example of poetic justice, but as a lesson about recognizing human worth. "Doctor, Margaret, would you mind if I documented your story? I think it could inspire others." Margaret considered Emily's request carefully. "Emily, I don't oppose sharing my story, but only if it can help others in similar situations. It shouldn't be about me, but about the importance of recognizing dignity and potential in everyone." Emily nodded, understanding Margaret's perspective perfectly. Dr. Stephen was reflecting on how this experience would change his own approach to work. "Professor, you've taught me once again that competence and wisdom can come disguised in unexpected forms. I promise to pay more attention to the people around me." Margaret smiled approvingly. "Stephen, that's perhaps the most important lesson of all." Richard Thompson was now facing the reality of explaining the whole situation to his wife, Martha, when he got home. He knew she would be shocked by his initial behavior, but hoped she would be proud of the changes he was implementing. "Dr. Margaret, my entire family should learn from your example of dignity under pressure." Margaret was finishing cleaning the board where she had demonstrated her mathematical competence. She paused for a moment, observing the equations still written there, representing her transition from invisibility to recognition. "It's funny how a board can symbolize so many life changes," she murmured to herself. Dr. David Reynolds observed Margaret's reflective moment and approached. "Dr. Margaret, this board should be preserved as a monument to the importance of recognizing hidden talents. It represents a moment of transformation, not just for you, but for our entire organization." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Dr. David, I like that idea. May it serve as a constant reminder that human value doesn't depend on titles or positions." Linda Anderson was organizing her own materials, preparing for her new responsibility as coordinator of the talent development program. "Margaret, I'm nervous but also very excited. This is the opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives." Margaret placed an encouraging hand on her shoulder. "Linda, nervousness is normal. It means you understand the importance of the responsibility. You'll do a wonderful job." Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was reflecting on the academic implications of the entire experience. "Dr. Margaret, your story should be studied in management and leadership courses. It perfectly illustrates the human and organizational costs of prejudice and the importance of inclusive systems." Margaret considered the observation. "Dr. Mitchell, if my experience can help educate future leaders, then all the suffering was worth it." Emily Thompson was watching the interaction between her father and Margaret with growing admiration. In a matter of hours, She had seen a fundamental transformation in Richard's character and knew this change would be permanent. "Dad, I've never been prouder of you than I am right now, seeing how you're embracing this opportunity to grow." Dr. Robert Patterson was finalizing the financial calculations to implement all the agreed-upon changes. "Dr. Margaret, based on the revenue projections from your mathematical solution, our company will not only survive the current crisis, but thrive significantly. Your contribution literally saved our organization." Margaret smiled modestly. "Dr. Robert, complex problems often have simpler solutions than they initially appear." Dr. Susan Bradley was developing protocols for the new talent development program. "Dr. Margaret, I'd like you to review the guidelines I'm creating to ensure they properly reflect the values you demonstrated today." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "Dr. Susan, it would be an honor to contribute to these guidelines. It's important that they're both practical and compassionate." Doctor. Stephen was preparing to return to his own work, but first wanted to express his final gratitude. "Professor, meeting you again under these circumstances was simultaneously shocking and inspiring. You reminded me why I entered science in the first place, to make a difference in the world." Margaret embraced her former student. "Stephen, you always had that passion. Sometimes we just need to be reminded of what truly matters." Margaret took one last walk through the laboratory, where she had worked as a cleaner for 2 years, observing every bench and equipment with new eyes. Tomorrow she would return as research director, but she wanted to properly say goodbye to her phase as an invisible employee. "Thank you for teaching me humility," she whispered to the empty space. Richard Thompson watched Margaret make her silent farewell and approached respectfully. "Dr. Margaret, I want you to know that this experience has fundamentally changed who I am as a leader and as a person. I will never forget the lessons you taught me today." Margaret looked directly at him. "Mr. Thompson, true change will be measured not by today's words, but by the actions of the coming years." Emily Thompson was organizing her notes for the article she planned to write about the entire experience. She knew she needed to capture not just the dramatic facts, but also the profound lessons about human dignity and value recognition. "Dr. Margaret, how would you like people to remember this story?" Margaret thought carefully. "Emily, I'd like them to remember that extraordinary talents often exist in ordinary places, waiting only for recognition and opportunity." Dr. David Reynolds was eager to begin implementing the structural changes that had been discussed. "Dr. Margaret, I'm already imagining how our research division will be transformed under your leadership. Your interdisciplinary approach could revolutionize not just our productivity, but our entire culture." Margaret smiled, feeling the intellectual excitement she hadn't experienced in years. "Dr. David, I'm looking forward to working with a team that values both competence and collaboration." Linda Anderson was reflecting on how she would explain her sudden promotion to her family when she got home. Her daughter, a college student, would be especially proud to learn that her mother had been chosen to lead an important program. "Margaret, my family won't believe it when I tell them about today. They always knew you were special, even when we didn't know exactly why." Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was considering the long-term implications of the new organizational structure. "Dr. Margaret, with you leading mathematical research and Linda coordinating talent development, our company could become a model for other organizations. We're creating something truly innovative." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "Dr. Mitchell, real innovation happens when we combine technical competence with human compassion." Dr. Robert Patterson was impressed with the financial maturity Margaret demonstrated in all negotiations. "Dr. Margaret, your decisions show not just mathematical intelligence but also sophisticated business wisdom. You understand that sustainable success requires balance between profit and purpose." Margaret smiled. "Dr. Robert, years of adversity taught me that true value can't be measured only in numbers." Dr. Susan Bradley was developing schedules to implement all the structural changes discussed. "Dr. Margaret, I suggest we begin the talent development program with a pilot project involving all support staff. They're most likely to have unrecognized skills." Margaret agreed enthusiastically. "Dr. Susan, that's a perfect approach. Let's start exactly where the problem is most acute." Dr. Stephen was preparing to leave the laboratory, but first wanted to make a final observation. Professor, seeing how you handled this entire situation, I realize you didn't just lose a university job years ago. The university lost an exceptional leader who could have transformed the entire institution. Margaret smiled nostalgically. Stephen, perhaps this was the journey I needed to take to learn how to use my talents most effectively. Richard Thompson was reflecting on how this experience would change his approach to leadership in all areas of his life. Dr. Margaret, you taught me that true authority comes from recognizing and developing others' potential, not from diminishing them to feel superior. Margaret nodded approvingly. Mr. Thompson, authentic leadership is about elevating others, not elevating yourself at their expense. Emily Thompson was finalizing her notes about the entire transformation she'd witnessed. Dr. Margaret, I hope your story inspires other people in difficult situations to never give up on their dreams and talents. Margaret considered Emily's words. Emily, more important than inspiring individuals is inspiring organizations to create systems that recognize and nurture talents from all backgrounds. Margaret did a final check to ensure all her cleaning materials were properly organized for her temporary replacement. She wanted to make sure her transition wouldn't create additional problems for the remaining cleaning team. Always finish what you started with the same dedication you demonstrated throughout the process, she murmured to herself. Dr. David Reynolds observed the meticulous attention Margaret dedicated even to the final details of her work as a cleaner. Dr. Margaret, your integrity is evident in everything you do, from solving complex equations to organizing cleaning supplies. That's an invaluable leadership quality. Margaret smiled. Dr. David, excellence is a habit, not a single event. Linda Anderson was watching Margaret organize the materials with a mixture of admiration and melancholy. Margaret, it'll be strange not seeing you here every morning in your blue uniform and gentle smile. Margaret hugged Linda affectionately. Linda, you'll still see me, only now we'll be working together on even more important projects. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was reflecting on the changes this experience would bring to her own work approach. Dr. Margaret, you reminded me of the importance of paying attention to people around us. How many valuable conversations have I missed by assuming organizational position equals intellectual capacity? Margaret nodded understandingly. Dr. Mitchell, we all make those assumptions sometimes. What matters is learning and changing. Dr. Robert Patterson was impressed with how Margaret had turned a potentially destructive situation into an opportunity for growth for everyone involved. Dr. Margaret, your approach to this crisis demonstrates a kind of emotional intelligence that is as valuable as your mathematical competence. Margaret smiled modestly. Dr. Robert, adversity can be a cruel but effective teacher. Dr. Susan Bradley was anticipating the challenges of implementing such significant organizational changes. Dr. Margaret, there will be resistance from some employees to the changes we're proposing. How do you suggest we handle this? Margaret considered the question carefully. Dr. Susan, real change happens through demonstration, not imposition. Let's let our results speak for themselves. Dr. Stephen Harrison was preparing to return to his laboratory, but first wanted to express a final reflection. Professor, this experience reminded me that real education doesn't only happen in classrooms. Today you taught lessons about dignity and human value that are more important than any mathematical formula. Margaret was visibly moved. Stephen, those are the lessons that truly matter in the end. Richard Thompson was contemplating how this experience would affect all his future relationships, both professional and personal. Dr. Margaret, you forced me to confront aspects of my personality that I preferred to ignore. That was uncomfortable but necessary. Margaret observed him with compassion. Mr. Thompson, personal growth always involves discomfort. The important thing is to embrace that discomfort as opportunity. Emily Thompson was watching the interaction between her father and Margaret with deep satisfaction. She knew she was witnessing a moment of genuine growth that would benefit not only the company, but also her family. Dad, I'm proud to see you taking responsibility and committing to real change. Richard embraced his daughter, grateful for her wisdom and support. Margaret looked one last time at the board, where she had demonstrated her mathematical competence hours earlier. The equations were still there, silent witnesses to a transformation that would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone present. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest gestures of courage, she reflected silently. Dr. David Reynolds was eager to share the news with the rest of the research team. Dr. Margaret, how would you like to be introduced to the researchers who weren't present today? Margaret thought for a moment. Dr. David, I'd like to be introduced simply as someone who's here to learn from them and contribute to our collective work. Linda Anderson was organizing her own thoughts about how to approach her new responsibility. Margaret, I'm afraid I won't live up to expectations. Margaret put her hands on Linda's shoulders and looked directly into her eyes. Linda, you have the most important quality. You genuinely care about people. Everything else can be learned. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was considering the research implications of the changes being implemented. Dr. Margaret, with your leadership and the organizational reforms we're planning, our research productivity could increase exponentially. Margaret nodded enthusiastically. Dr. Mitchell, when people feel valued and recognized, they naturally contribute more to collective goals. Dr. Robert Patterson was finalizing the legal details of all structural changes. Dr. Margaret, I'll prepare contracts that not only protect your interests, but also ensure the talent development program has legal protection against future administrative changes. Margaret appreciated the foresight. Dr. Robert, sustainability is crucial. These changes must outlast any specific individual. Dr. Susan Bradley was developing detailed timelines to implement all the reforms discussed. Dr. Margaret, I suggest we begin with a comprehensive evaluation of all current employees to identify hidden talents. Margaret agreed enthusiastically. Dr. Susan, this evaluation should be conducted with sensitivity and respect, ensuring no one feels judged or threatened. Dr. Stephen was reflecting on how this experience would change his approach to mentoring younger students. Professor, you reminded me that our work as educators goes far beyond transmitting technical knowledge. We must also recognize and nurture human potential in all its forms. Margaret smiled with pride. Stephen, you always understood these deeper truths. You just needed to be reminded of them. Richard Thompson was contemplating the personal journey he had begun that day. Doctor, Margaret, I realize I have much work to do to become the kind of leader my company and my family deserve. Margaret nodded encouragingly. Mr. Thompson, recognizing the need for growth is the first step. Your willingness to do this work shows change has already begun. Emily Thompson was considering how to properly document the entire experience for maximum positive impact. Dr. Margaret, I want to ensure how I tell your story honors not only your successes, but also your struggles. Margaret appreciated Emily's sensitivity. Emily, struggle and overcoming are equally important parts of the story. Both should be told with honesty and dignity. Margaret took one final pause before leaving the lab for the last time as a cleaner. She wanted to memorize this moment, not for nostalgia, but as a reminder that transformation is always possible, regardless of how impossible it may seem initially. Every journey begins with a single courageous step, she murmured to herself. Dr. David Reynolds observed Margaret's reflective moment and felt deeply moved. Dr. Margaret, your journey today proves redemption stories aren't just fiction. They can happen in real life when courageous people refuse to accept limitations imposed by others. Margaret smiled gratefully. Dr. David, courage isn't absence of fear, but action despite fear. Linda Anderson was watching Margaret prepare to leave the lab and felt a wave of emotion. Margaret, thank you for teaching me that dignity in work doesn't depend on the type of work we do, but on how we do any work given to us. Margaret hugged Linda one last time. Linda, you already knew this. You just needed to see it recognized. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was reflecting on the professional lessons she had learned during that extraordinary afternoon. Dr. Margaret, you taught me that real competence includes not only technical knowledge, but also human wisdom and moral integrity. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Mitchell, knowledge without wisdom is dangerous, and wisdom without compassion is useless. Dr. Robert Patterson was impressed with the maturity Margaret had shown navigating all the legal and financial complexities of the situation. "Dr. Margaret, your approach to this negotiation demonstrates you understand that truly sustainable agreements benefit all involved parties." Margaret smiled. "Dr. Robert, victories that humiliate others are actually defeats in disguise." Dr. Susan Bradley was anticipating the practical aspects of implementing the structural changes. "Dr. Margaret, how do you suggest we explain these reforms to employees who may not immediately understand their benefits?" Margaret considered the question. "Dr. Susan, transparency and patience are essential. Real change takes time to be understood and accepted." Dr. Stephen was preparing for his final farewell, but first wanted to express one last observation. "Professor, seeing you today reminded me why I chose an academic career. It wasn't just for the love of science, but for the possibility of making a positive difference in the world." Margaret was visibly moved. "Stephen, you've always had that passion. Never let bureaucracy or disappointments diminish it." Richard Thompson was contemplating how this experience would affect his leadership in all areas of his life. "Dr. Margaret, you taught me that true power comes from empowering others, not from controlling them." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Mr. Thompson, authentic leaders are measured not by what they accumulate, but by what they build in other people." Emily Thompson was observing the complete transformation that had occurred in her father during those few hours. "Dad, I'd never seen you demonstrate such humility and openness to growth. This gives me hope for the future of our company and our family." Richard hugged Emily, deeply grateful for her wisdom and support during this life-changing experience. Margaret looked around the laboratory one last time, memorizing not just the physical space, but also the faces of the people who had shared her transformation. "Every person here contributed to this change," she reflected. "Real growth always happens in community, never in isolation." Dr. David Reynolds was eager to begin working with Margaret on restructuring the research division. "Dr. Margaret, I believe our collaboration could result in discoveries that go far beyond what any of us could achieve individually." Margaret smiled enthusiastically. "Dr. David, true collaboration multiplies individual potential in ways that defy all expectations." Linda Anderson was mentally organizing how she would explain her promotion to her family that evening. "Margaret, my mother always said that good deeds come back to us in unexpected ways. Today I understand what she meant." Margaret laughed softly. "Linda, your mother is a wise woman. Genuine kindness always finds a way to multiply." Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was considering how this experience would change her approach to mentoring young scientists. "Dr. Margaret, you reminded me that our work as senior researchers includes the responsibility to recognize and develop emerging talents." Margaret nodded enthusiastically. "Dr. Mitchell, every talented person we neglect is a missed opportunity for all of humanity." Dr. Robert Patterson was impressed with the long-term vision Margaret demonstrated in all her decisions. "Dr. Margaret, your choices show you're thinking not just about your own success, but about the well-being of future generations of employees." Margaret considered the comment. "Dr. Robert, truly intelligent decisions always consider impacts that go beyond immediate benefit." Dr. Susan Bradley was developing protocols to ensure the implemented changes would be sustainable. "Dr. Margaret, how can we ensure these reforms survive future administrative changes?" Margaret thought carefully. "Dr. Susan, sustainable changes must be embedded in organizational culture, not just in administrative policy." Dr. Stephen made his final farewell, hugging Margaret with tears of pride and gratitude. "Professor, meeting you again and seeing your strength and wisdom was one of the most inspiring moments of my career." Margaret returned the hug affectionately. "Stephen, seeing the intelligent and compassionate man you've become is one of the greatest rewards a teacher can have." Richard Thompson accompanied Margaret to the laboratory door, carrying a mixture of shame about the past and hope for the future. "Dr. Margaret, I promise I will do everything in my power to ensure the changes we discussed become permanent." Margaret looked directly at him. "Mr. Thompson, I will judge you by future actions, not present promises. Emily Thompson watched Margaret's departure with deep admiration and renewed hope in human potential for growth and redemption. Dr. Margaret, thank you for teaching me that real justice isn't about punishment, but about transformation. Margaret smiled affectionately. Emily, you already had that wisdom. You just needed to see it reflected in a real situation. Margaret stopped at the laboratory door for one last look. The board still displayed the equations she had solved, but now they represented much more than mathematics. They symbolized proof that hidden talents can transform not only technical problems, but entire human lives. Tomorrow we begin building something better, Margaret said softly, addressing everyone present. Not just a more efficient company, but a fairer community where every person can contribute their best talents. Dr. David Reynolds nodded with conviction. Dr. Margaret, with your leadership, I believe we can create a model that other organizations will want to emulate. Margaret smiled determinedly. Dr. David, our success will be measured not just by our results, but by the impact we have on other organizations. Linda Anderson watched Margaret leave and murmured a silent promise to honor the trust that had been placed in her. I won't disappoint you, Margaret, she whispered. I'll make sure every person we help knows that you made this possible. As Margaret walked through the company halls for the last time as a cleaner, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with cruel humiliation and ended with an opportunity for transformation. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as seemingly impossible challenges, she thought. The next day, Margaret returned to the same building, but this time through the main entrance as Director of Mathematical Research. Linda waited for her with a radiant smile and a folder full of proposals for the Talent Development Program. Margaret, I spent all night thinking of ideas. I'm so excited for us to begin this work. Dr. David Reynolds had prepared a special office for Margaret, but was surprised when she requested to maintain a direct view of the laboratory where everything had begun. I always want to remember where I came from and why I'm here, she explained. Humility and purpose must walk together. Richard Thompson called a company-wide meeting to announce the structural changes and present Margaret in her new position. His presentation was humble and honest about past mistakes and the commitment to real change. Today we begin a new phase where talent is recognized regardless of origin or position. Emily Thompson meticulously documented the first week of implementing the reforms, capturing both the successes and challenges. Her story would eventually be published in a national business magazine, inspiring other companies to examine their own talent recognition practices. Dr. Stephen visited Margaret in her new office, bringing flowers to celebrate her transformation. Professor, this office suits you much better than any cleaner's uniform, he joked. Margaret laughed, but gently corrected. Stephen, the uniform never diminished my dignity. It just hid it temporarily. 3 months later, the Talent Development Program had identified and promoted 17 employees who were in positions that didn't fully utilize their capabilities. Company productivity increased 23% and employee satisfaction reached record levels. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell collaborated with Margaret on developing new research protocols that combined mathematical efficiency with social inclusion. Dr. Margaret, our approach is becoming a model for other research institutions, she reported proudly. We're proving that scientific excellence and social justice can coexist. Linda Anderson became a recognized speaker on developing hidden talent in organizations. Her first presentation at a national conference was titled, Seeing the Invisible, How a Janitor Taught Me About Leadership. The audience gave her a standing ovation after her moving presentation. Dr. Robert Patterson prepared a detailed financial report showing that investments in talent development had generated a 400% return in less than 6 months. Dr. Margaret, your ideas are not only morally right, but also economically smart, he concluded. Dr. Susan Bradley implemented new hiring protocols that included comprehensive assessments of potential, not just formal qualifications. Dr. Margaret, we're discovering impressive talent in candidates other companies rejected, she reported enthusiastically. Margaret's mother, Mrs. Dorothy, finally received the full treatment she needed and showed significant signs of improvement. During a hospital visit, she held Margaret's hand and said, "My daughter, your struggle wasn't just for me, but for all people who need a second chance." Richard Thompson became a vocal advocate for inclusive business practices, speaking at conferences about his own transformation. "I learned that true leadership isn't about always being right, but about always being willing to learn and change," he said in his talks. Dr. David Reynolds collaborated with Margaret on publishing several scientific papers demonstrating how diversity of perspectives improves research quality. "Dr. Margaret, our partnership is redefining how the scientific community thinks about collaboration and inclusion," he noted with satisfaction. 1 year after the initial incident, Margaret was invited to speak at the university where she had been a professor. The auditorium was packed with students and teachers curious to hear her story of overcoming adversity. "Talents don't expire," she told the fascinated audience. "They just wait for the right opportunity to shine again." Emily Thompson published a book based on Margaret's experience, titled The Dignity Equation: How a Cruel Bet Became a Business Revolution. The book became a national bestseller and was translated into several languages, inspiring organizational reforms in companies worldwide. Dr. Stephen established a scholarship in Margaret's name for mathematics students from disadvantaged backgrounds. "Professor, this scholarship will ensure other talents aren't wasted due to lack of opportunities," he explained during the launch ceremony. Linda Anderson opened her own organizational talent development consultancy, with Margaret as mentor and advisor. "Margaret, you taught me that seeing potential in others is a skill that can be developed and shared," Linda said during her company launch. 2 years after the initial transformation, Richard's company had become a market leader in its sector, known for both technical innovation and exemplary social practices. Margaret was elected Executive of the Year by a prestigious business magazine, but dedicated the award to all the hidden talents still waiting for recognition. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell assumed the position of Director of Scientific Inclusion, a role created specifically to ensure that the lessons learned from Margaret were implemented across all aspects of research. "Dr. Margaret, your influence extends far beyond mathematics," she observed. "You're changing how we conduct science." During an executive board meeting, Margaret presented data showing that companies implementing programs similar to theirs experienced average productivity increases of 35%. "Talent recognition isn't just a moral matter," she argued. "It's smart business strategy." Dr. Robert Patterson prepared a detailed case study about the company's transformation that was adopted by business schools as an example of transformational leadership. "Dr. Margaret, your story is educating the next generation of business leaders," he reported proudly. Dr. Susan Bradley developed a certification program for companies demonstrating real commitment to developing hidden talent. "Dr. Margaret, we're creating industry standards based on the principles you demonstrated," she explained enthusiastically. Richard Thompson established a foundation dedicated to identifying and supporting wasted talent in organizations across the country. "Dr. Margaret, this foundation will ensure your experience benefits far more people beyond our company," he said during the launch ceremony. 3 years later, Margaret received an invitation to become a visiting professor at the university, where she had originally lost her job. She accepted the position on the condition that she could develop a special program for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. "True education is about creating opportunities, not just transmitting information," she explained. During her first class as a visiting professor, Margaret wrote on the board the same equation she had solved on that transformative day years earlier. "This equation changed my life," she told the fascinated students, "not because it was complex, but because it gave me the opportunity to prove that competence knows no social boundaries." Emily Thompson continued documenting the long-term impact of Margaret's story, tracking other people who had been inspired to seek recognition for their hidden talents. "Dr. Margaret, your story has become a movement," she reported. "People across the country are demanding recognition for their true capabilities." Dr. Stephen collaborated with Margaret in establishing a research institute that combined scientific excellence with social inclusion. "Professor, this institute embodies all the values you've always championed," he said during the inauguration. "Science in service to humanity without distinction of class or origin. Linda Anderson became a recognized national authority in inclusive talent management, consulting hundreds of companies on implementing similar programs. Margaret, you taught me that real leadership is about creating opportunities for others to lead, she said during a televised interview. 5 years after the initial incident, Margaret was nominated for an International Transformational Leadership Award. During her acceptance speech, she said, "This award doesn't belong to me alone, but to all the people who refuse to accept that talent could be wasted by prejudice or circumstances." Dr. David Reynolds published an academic book about how Margaret's approach had revolutionized scientific research methodologies. Dr. Margaret demonstrated that diversity of perspectives not only improves outcomes, but accelerates discoveries, he wrote in the introduction. The company continued growing and expanding, always maintaining the principles of talent recognition as core values. New employees were trained about Margaret's story as part of mandatory orientation, ensuring the lessons learned would never be forgotten. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell established partnerships with international universities to study the effects of hidden talent inclusion programs on scientific productivity. Dr. Margaret, your approach is influencing scientific research on a global level, she reported with admiration. Dr. Susan Bradley developed a set of standardized metrics to measure the effectiveness of hidden talent development programs. Dr. Margaret, we're creating science to support the art you demonstrated, she explained. Objective data that proves the value of human dignity. Richard Thompson became a sought-after consultant for CEOs wanting to transform their own organizational cultures. Dr. Margaret taught me that true transformation begins with honest recognition of our own biases, he would say in his consultations. Dr. Robert Patterson published economic analyses showing that companies adopting similar practices consistently outperformed competitors in long-term metrics. Dr. Margaret, your principles are not only morally superior, but also economically advantageous, he concluded in his research. Margaret's mother, fully recovered, became a volunteer in support programs for families facing similar medical crises. "My daughter saved me," she often said, but more importantly, she learned to save others in the process. 10 years after the initial transformation, Margaret was invited to speak at an international conference on business innovation. Her presentation was titled, "When Humiliation Becomes Revolution, the Transformative Power of Recognizing Hidden Talents." During her talk, she displayed a photo of the original blackboard where she had solved the equation that changed her life. "This image doesn't just represent a mathematical solution," she explained to the international audience. "It represents proof that extraordinary talents exist in ordinary places, waiting only for recognition and opportunity." Emily Thompson, now an acclaimed investigative journalist, continued covering stories of social injustices and positive transformations. "Dr. Margaret taught me that the best stories are those that not only inform, but inspire real change," she wrote in her autobiography. Dr. Stephen became dean of the university, where Margaret now held a tenured professorship. His first action was establishing a policy ensuring no qualified staff would be underutilized, regardless of their current position. "Professor Margaret taught me that wasting talent is both an academic and moral error," he explained. Linda Anderson opened branches of her consultancy in 6 countries, spreading the principles of hidden talent development internationally. "Margaret, your influence now reaches continents," she reported during a video conference. "We're creating a global network of human dignity recognition." The original company had become a mandatory case study in MBA programs worldwide. Students analyzed not only the implemented strategies, but also the personal transformations that made these strategies possible. Dr. David Reynolds collaborated with Margaret in creating new scientific research paradigms that prioritized inclusive collaboration. "Dr. Margaret, we're redefining what it means to do science in the 21st century, he observed. "Your approach is becoming the new standard of excellence." During a special ceremony, the laboratory where everything began was officially renamed the Margaret Foster Laboratory of Dignity and Discovery. The plaque included the original equation she had solved, along with the phrase, "Where hidden talents meet deserved recognition." Dr. Jennifer Mitchell was appointed to lead a new international institute dedicated to studying correlations between social inclusion and scientific innovation. Dr. Margaret, your influence is shaping global scientific policy, she said with admiration. Governments are redesigning research programs based on your principles. 15 years after the transformative incident, Margaret was invited to give the keynote speech at a United Nations conference on sustainable development. She used the platform to argue that real sustainability includes not only natural resources, but also human resources, ensuring that no talent is wasted by prejudice or circumstance. Dr. Susan Bradley established an international network of companies committed to talent recognition practices, creating global standards and accountability systems. Dr. Margaret, we are institutionalizing the values you demonstrated, she reported. Systemic change that will outlast any individual. Richard Thompson wrote his memoirs titled The CEO Who Learned Humility, How a Cleaner Taught Me to Lead. The book became required reading in executive leadership programs. Margaret not only changed my company, he wrote, she changed my soul. Dr. Robert Patterson published longitudinal analyses showing that the Margaret Revolution, as it became known academically, had influenced corporate policies in more than 50 countries. Dr. Margaret, your story transcended personal anecdote and became a global movement, he documented. Emily Thompson's personal transformation led her to become a labor rights activist, founding an organization that advocated for fair recognition of underutilized workers globally. Dr. Margaret, you taught me that privilege comes with the responsibility to create opportunities for others, she declared. Dr. Stephen Harrison established an international exchange program that allowed researchers from disadvantaged backgrounds to study at prestigious universities. Professor Margaret, this program will ensure that geographies and circumstances do not limit intellectual potential, he explained during the launch. Linda Anderson was recognized by the UN as a Goodwill Ambassador for Human Talent Development, a position created specifically to promote the principles she had learned from Margaret. Margaret taught me that seeing potential in others is a universal moral responsibility, she said in her acceptance speech. 20 years after the day that changed her life, Margaret returned to the laboratory renamed in her honor for a special ceremony. She approached the board where it all began and wrote a new equation, not mathematical but philosophical. Human dignity plus talent recognition, infinite transformation. During the ceremony, she reflected, that day of humiliation became the first day of the rest of my life, not just for me, but for thousands of people who found the courage to demand recognition for their true talents. Her voice trembled with emotion, but remained firm with conviction. Dr. David Reynolds, now director of the International Institute that bore their joint names, presented data showing that inclusive research methodologies had accelerated scientific discoveries by 40% globally. Dr. Margaret, you proved that social justice and scientific excellence are not only compatible but mutually dependent, he concluded. The final part of the ceremony included testimonials from hundreds of people whose lives had been transformed directly or indirectly by the Margaret Revolution. Each story confirmed that recognizing hidden talents created waves of transformation that expanded far beyond individual situations. Dr. Jennifer Mitchell, now the Secretary of Science and Technology of her country, implemented national policies based on the principles demonstrated by Margaret. Dr. Margaret, your influence now shapes public policy, she reported. Governments are redesigning entire systems to ensure that no talent is wasted. During a final interview for the documentary being produced about her life, Margaret was asked what message she would like to leave for future generations. Talents are like seeds, she replied thoughtfully. They can remain dormant for years, but with the right soil, recognition, opportunity, and dignity, they can grow and transform entire landscapes. Dr. Susan Bradley revealed data showing that companies following the Margaret model of inclusive management consistently outperformed all performance metrics, from employee satisfaction to return on investment. "Dr. Margaret, you mathematically proved that kindness is good for business," she joked during a conference. Richard Thompson, now retired but active as a philanthropist, established universities in underserved communities, ensuring that economic limitations did not hinder talent development. "Margaret taught me that true success is measured by how many people you help discover their own talents," he said, during the inauguration of his 10th university. Dr. Robert Patterson published his final work before retirement, a comprehensive study proving that dignity economics, economic systems based on the full recognition of human potential, outperformed traditional models in sustainability and long-term productivity. Margaret's influence extended beyond the business world. Educational systems globally began implementing Margaret Potential Assessments, methodologies that identified hidden talents in students regardless of social or economic background. Emily Thompson, now an international best-selling author, published her second book about Margaret, The Equation Continues: How a Lesson in Dignity Became a Global Movement. The book documented how the principles demonstrated in that laboratory had influenced policies on 6 continents. Dr. Stephen, in his retirement speech as dean, credited Margaret with transforming not only his university, but his entire understanding of the purpose of higher education. "Professor Margaret taught me that universities exist not to confirm privileges, but to discover and nurture talents wherever they exist," he declared. Linda Anderson established a global foundation that provided microloans to talented people in situations similar to what Margaret had faced. "Margaret taught me that sometimes people just need a small opportunity to transform not only their own lives, but their entire communities," she explained. During a final conference before her retirement, Margaret presented data compiled over 2 decades, showing that talent recognition programs had created over 1 million skilled jobs globally and contributed trillions to the world economy. What began as a cruel bet became proof that human dignity is not just a moral imperative, but also the most effective economic strategy that exists, she concluded to the audience of world leaders. "When we recognize and nurture all talents, everyone prospers." Dr. Amunari. David Reynolds joined Margaret in retirement, but they continued collaborating on research projects that combined scientific excellence with social inclusion. "Dr. Margaret, our partnership proved that the greatest advances happen when different perspectives work in harmony," he reflected. On the day of her official retirement, Margaret returned one last time to the laboratory where it all began. She observed young researchers from diverse backgrounds working collaboratively, exactly as she had dreamed decades before. "The equation is solved," she murmured with satisfaction. "Dignity multiplied by opportunity always results in transformation." End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this incredible story of overcoming and transformation. Where are you watching from? If you have any similar experience or know someone who went through a similar situation, share it with us in the comments. Do you believe Margaret made the right decisions throughout her journey? We love reading your opinions and experiences. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this moving story. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.